Day and welcome to Data Points. My name is Ryan and I'm the president of Pinpoint Guam. And today we're going to be talking with John Selleck, and he is with One Micronesia World Logistics. And that doesn't sound like in our lane, but the reason why I asked John to come in is because we've been talking about the Jones Act and the cost of shipping and the cost of living on Guam. And Jones Act is constantly called out, and I've never actually understood what the Jones Act was. I never understood other than the basics, and I never understood how it impacts the cost of living. So I was introduced to John as a subject matter expert, and we met for about 10 minutes before this, and I said, stop talking because we just got to get all this on tape. You're going to really enjoy this one. Take a listen. It's a long one, but definitely worth the listen through. If you want to do that, you can find it on YouTube, or for the snippets, you can look on Instagram, Facebook, and you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Enjoy. Thank you. Afane, welcome to Data Points. My name is Ryan. I'm the president of Pinpoint Guam, and today I'm with John Selleck with One Micronesia World Logistics. Welcome, John.
Day. Thank you.
I asked John, my introduction to John came through a mutual friend, and it came because we've been having conversations around the Jones Act and how that impacts the cost of everything here and how it impacts the economy overall. So our mutual friend was having a conversation with you and said, you got to talk to John. So I gave John a call. And within about 15 minutes, I got you. I have to have you on the podcast. So I appreciate you coming on. And John, to start off, it's clear to me through a course of our conversation that you're a subject matter expert. But I'd love for you to explain to our audience, how you came to be in the logistics on Guam.
So thank you, Ryan. My background is actually I'm an economist by training. Mm-hmm. I have my undergraduate degree at Berkeley and then a master's degree from Columbia, and had worked in antitrust prior to graduate school, and it was in the state of Alaska working on oil royalty cases, and worked with another firm from Oakland that was a maritime economics firm. Okay. And they were looking at the tanker economics as part of the whole picture for the Attorney General for Alaska. When I came back from graduate school, I was working for a small firm doing utility economics at the California Public Utility Commission on mostly energy pricing, electricity and some telecom. And the person that I had worked with in Alaska for this other firm, I ran into her on the street, and she said, "Oh, we just got a new case. It's the shipping rates to Guam."
Okay.
Under the then Shipping Act, under what was then the rates at that point were regulated by the federal government under basically cost of service rate regulations similar to utilities.
This is 1990.
This was 1992, okay. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, early 90s. Mm-hmm. And and she said, I can't work with my boss on another case. Would you be interested? And I said, yeah, that would be really interesting. I would love to do that.
Because of your background in antitrust?
My background was in utility economics. Okay. Well, had not been in shipping before, but I just had a love for the Pacific Islands.
Okay.
I grew up my dad, it's like he has to go to Hawaii, go to Kauai, Poipu Beach every year.
Okay.
That's like his only vacation. And for me, just my, knowledge of Guam, knowledge of the history of Guam, I found it really interesting. And then took that case or worked on that case, and was several years of analysis and testimony and running the cost of the service, et cetera. And having the firm was sold to Pacific Gas and Electric.
Okay.
So the transportation division was separated off. And I also at that time was working with the Commission on Self-Determination on doing an economic assessment of the U.S. military of Guam's economy. And so having been recently in grad school and still knew all the math, I did the calculation of the input-output multipliers for Guam's economy, which had not been ever done before by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So I did that for that study. And almost moved to Guam at that point. When Joe Bradley, who was working with, who was chief economist, went over to Bank of Guam, he had asked me to be his successor as chief economist, and almost moved to Guam then.
Okay.
But my ex-wife was not interested in that at the time. But one of the people I worked with was her mother grew up with a guy, Bob Coulson, that had a little shipping line, Philippines, Micronesia, and Orient Shipping. And it was a small non-Jones Act service that went out from the West Coast, went to Majuro, went through Micronesia, went up to Saipan, because Saipan is exempt, and then down to Mindanao and had the Dole pineapple contract, and brought that back as his backhaul on his eastbound voyage. And Bob was a former president of Matson Navigation, and had kind of left when Matson had pulled back out of Guam. They left the Dole pineapple contract. They had moved away from him as the CEO. So he went and got that contract that Matson left and started a shipping line.
Okay.
So, visiting his office in San Francisco was, he had this great office filled with, Marshallese star charts.
Okay.
And,
stuff that you already kind of knew about and appreciated.
It was all wow, this is it's like his, great office in, financial district, San Francisco. His house in Tiburon has he's doing well. You're like, wow, what a great life this guy has put together for this. And then I was at his office one day, and he said, "Oh, did you see that Matson is going to buy APL's Guam service?" And that APL service I had studied for years as part of the shipping case, because back then it was APL and Sealand.
Okay, Sealand, yeah.
So those were the carriers that I had studied. So I said, "Oh, would you see it as a conflict if I go speak to Matson?" And he said, "Oh, no, not at all." So went over and Matson was just on Market Street, just down a couple blocks away. Went down, told the receptionist, my background, sent me up to the top floor, met with the senior vice president who was putting together the attempted acquisition.
Okay.
And they hired me as a consultant to do the due diligence.
I would imagine right on the spot.
Yeah, right on the spot. He was like, he was like, "Oh, this is like manna from heaven." The words that he said. So they hired me, and then actually at the time, they had a much larger consulting firm, Mercer, that they were spending a lot more money than they spent on me. And Mercer's report was that Matson should not buy this service.
Okay.
Because this was Guam in the 90s. They're saying, "Oh, the BRAC is going on, military spending is going to be going down.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese tourism that was huge in the 80s is going down. Japan's economy is..."
It was bleak.
Yeah. It was not... So it was...
Right.
Their perspective was the outlook doesn't look that great. And, I told Matson, "You're going to get from this deal 6 Jones Act ships for less than you just paid for a single ship."
Okay.
At NASCO in San Diego, the shipyard, the R.J. Pfeiffer. And you're going to get the Guam service, and, the military's not going anywhere. They're still going to be in Guam. The Japanese, to the extent they need to, economize, probably fewer trips to Hawaii. Guam could still be in that budget area. And so they threw out the Mercer study and used my study to present to the board, and hired me in as into corporate development at Matson and director of strategy. And I was at Matson for 8 years. And
can I stop you?
Yeah.
Just on that point, right? Because there's a Mercer study and then there's your study, right?
Yeah.
Differentiate between the information, the Mercer study and your study, and why was yours better?
Well, the Mercer study basically was looking at those facts that the economic prospects for Guam going into the 90s were that the economy would be in decline.
I see.
My study was that that'll be mitigated by some other factors, which is that Japan will still come.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the Japanese economy goes down, there's still Japan will still come to Guam. And B, the military, even though there's some downsizing, the military is not going anywhere. There's still going to be a need for military cargo to be shipped to Guam. There's still going to be military spending on Guam.
And the reason I brought up the distinction is because there's macro and there's the micro.
Right.
And there's context and there's lack of context. And so you had context and you brought context to a larger decision that was going to be made. And the context was exactly what you said. You paid this for one ship and you're getting six
ships.
Plus a captive audience on the line.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So it made a lot of sense from that way of thinking with context and with the underlying data from regional from someone who had a little bit more wider knowledge of the area. So that's I think one of the points that we say a lot of people are missing that.
Yeah, and exactly. And additionally, the cost of the 6 ships. So my background had been studying APL's cost of service and knowing how much those ships had cost. APL was in a position, the ships were almost 25 years of age, or in some cases were older. But when APL was sold foreign because of the Jones Act, those ships would have been essentially worthless if owned by a foreign owner.
Yeah.
So they were highly motivated to sell
mm-hmm.
and sell to a Jones Act operator. And so it was such a natural sell. And, basically Matson has made literally billions of dollars from that transaction. That was like $200 million or something. It was,
what's a lot of money, but when you see
it was like $160 million for 6 ships and the Guam service.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, it was a huge opportunity for Matson because, when I first joined Matson, they would say, we have 8 ships going to Hawaii and Hawaii can only consume so much.
Mm-hmm.
So, our opportunities for growth as a company are limited, right? I mean, one of the things that I presented to Matson that I was a big advocate for at the time was, I said, Hawaii is also 8 ships going from Hawaii to the mainland, and anything Hawaii can produce, the mainland will lap up and love. So, and Matson's cost of service to delivery center, whether it's Safeway or Costco or Walmart, Matson's sending empty containers from Hawaii essentially to the delivery centers of every major retailer on the West Coast.
So fill them up.
So whatever you can send, you have 0 transportation cost.
Right.
So, I was pushing for bottled water. I was pushing for rum because at that time, our parent company, Alexander & Baldwin, owned HCNS, Hawaii Commercial and Sugar, the major sugar grower in the islands at that time at Maui. And I was like, why, when you go to Maui and you order a Mai Tai and you're sitting surrounded by sugarcane, are they pouring Puerto Rican rum to make your drink?
Right.
Why is there not a Hawaiian rum?
Right.
We're the major owners of this sugar, right? and we have the transportation network.
And you have the brand.
We have the brand. And they said, oh, we tried that once. And I was like, well, and it's this file, right? Back in the 50s, we tried that, right? And this is like in the 90s. So that institutional knowledge, like that, it was tried once, it didn't work. And so I said, well, let me investigate why this didn't work.
Yep.
Go back, there are a couple of things. One, the rates were deregulated in 95. Okay. So prior to the deregulation,
it was a thumbs down. Yeah.
Prior to deregulation, anything the company carries on for its own core account is revenue that cannot be recovered from your other customers. Because it's a cost of service. Basically, there's allowed revenues.
Understood. So you can't charge, if you're going that way anyway, you can't charge someone else for going that way.
Well, no, basically, so the issue for Hawaii at that time, when the rates were regulated under the cost of service regulation, basically you take all of your costs, your capital expenses, you have a rate of return on invested capital.
Okay.
And then you have your cost of sending containers back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's basically what you come up with is these are the allowed revenues for the company.
Okay.
This is like how much, and it's the same thing for like a power, it's easier to think of it for a power company.
Okay.
This is basically how much you can charge, divide by kilowatt hours. This is your allowed price per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
Right? Now, if the company utilizes its backhaul to make money, the other ratepayers will say, you're getting your allowed rate of return,
right,
including your own revenue. You have to charge yourself something and argue about what that is. And so instead of it being free transportation, it's now costs you something.
Understood.
Because you lose revenue from what you can charge everyone else.
Yeah.
Now, as an economist, you would say, well, that's not a bad thing. You could have lower shipping rates in Hawaii, and that would help generate the economy of Hawaii, and people will buy more stuff as an electric utility. My argument was that there should be more of the growth, you take into account that you want to grow.
Right. There's it's subsidizing something that's going to be a growth opportunity.
But in 1995, rates were deregulated.
Okay.
So that was about the time that I joined Matson and as an employee. And so basically at that time, things were wide open. There was no longer that cost. So that was the first reason that in the 50s it didn't work. The second reason in the 50s it didn't work is their partner they chose to develop rum in Hawaii was Seagram's.
Okay.
Who owns Bacardi.
Right.
And so they went, a couple years with Seagram's kind of leading them along until Seagram's decided it doesn't make sense for us to develop a competition
to our existing product.
For our existing product. And especially back then, like now there's a lot of specialty rums, specialty
segmentation.
But back then it was like rum is Bacardi.
Yeah.
They
probably just did it to kill the competition anyway.
It had that smell to it for me. But those are things that happen along the way, right? Where companies believe something to be true, and even when circumstances change, they've institutionally decided you can't do that. Right?
Yeah, that's why we really promote looking at the data and always asking why. And it's really hard to ask why when no one really knows that's a point, that's a thread that comes up in our conversations too, is the institutional knowledge is leaving the building in a lot of ways. The context, the boomers who are running things now and have the institutional, the context knowledge are going to be leaving. And there's a lot of people coming from behind who may not know the context that's exiting. And just like that, the value is in the context, but then also what's leaving the building too is that mentality that this won't work.
Right.
And that's a good thing too, because maybe this hasn't been questioned since 1950.
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot of that Right.
Exactly.
And so when you come and make the data case and try and sell it to leadership, it's always hard because, no, this is the way I've always done it. And there's no impetus for change really because I'm fine. I'm Matson. I'm fine, right? I don't need Guam,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But the thread makes it a $1 billion thing and a scalable thing. You have to be able to see and contextualize the data and be willing to look at it from a different way.
Exactly. It's a two-edged sword that way, but I'm optimistic for the future in that way. The paradigms are changing so quickly.
Really? Yeah.
They're scared for the future too.
Yeah.
No, both.
Really
We're at an interesting time.
Yeah. No. So you set up Matson to do this deal, right?
Well, I helped Matson. Part of it is the executives wanted to do it.
It was coming. Yes.
They wanted to do it. So I helped give them a justification.
Right.
That the other consulting firm didn't. So, that I think and their relationship with the then parent company. So Matson now is a publicly held company that's been separated from Alexander & Baldwin. But back then, Alexander & Baldwin was a real estate owning company in Hawaii, one of the old sugar growing enterprises. And so tended to have a very conservative mindset as far as investment and
I would say
things like that.
Very old world, right?
Yeah, very old world. So it was somewhat challenging for the Matson executives to approach the board and the then CEO, and convince him that they needed to make these major purchases. He had, and for most of Alexander & Baldwin's history in owning Matson, the CEOs had come up through Matson.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, because of things that happened, well, actually, I'm sorry, this happened before he became CEO. So that it's not, I'm thinking further ahead.
Got it. Yeah, jumping ahead of the
timeline. Yeah.
So what we're talking about is kind of like how you got to Guam, the origin story, and just kind of your progression through your real estate career. Right? I mean, your
shipping
career. Sorry, I got real estate on the brain, but through your shipping career. So now you're working for Matson.
Working for Matson, working with on the Guam service, involved somewhat in some of the expansions into Micronesia, which my old client, Bob Coulson, was the competitor at that time. So and then working on other projects for Matson, just in corporate development reviews, any expenditures, whether they meet the hurdle rate for the corporation.
Yes.
So they have to do reviews of, when Sand Island, Honolulu, is converted from straddle carrier to grounded operation or wheeled operation. Like, what's going to be the rate of return on this? How do we, if the person who's making this decision wants it justified, wants to spend $30 million, you have to help him try to justify it.
Yeah, so working with data to decision business outcome, or
exactly
to support business outcomes or to project.
Exactly.
And just kind of that interplay.
And then working on the annual, the 5-year strategic plan, things like that. So
strategy guy the whole way.
Strategy. Yeah, which is, and that was great for me. I just love being in strategy, ideating, and coming up with new things and kind of putting them out. And my original boss at Matson was really great at just letting the staff just go crazy with ideas, right? And just throw stuff out there and then pitch it, right?
I love doing that.
Yeah.
So okay, Matson, but then you played a role in bringing APL.
Right.
Okay.
So basically, I wasn't getting the career progression at Matson that I wanted, and was looking at other positions, including up the corporate development position for Alexander and Baldwin in Hawaii.
Okay.
And so I was applying for these other positions. There was some management changes happening at Matson. Was going to go to Hawaii to work for the government relations and strategic head of strategy for Young Brothers, which is the inter-island barge carrier in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And my kind of mentor at Matson left to go to Saltchuk, and he was the president of Matson at the time. But during this kind of turmoil, it became known that I was like looking for jobs elsewhere.
Oh, I see.
And, I had applied for the pricing job at Matson. At that time, they were hiring people from outside the company, actually mostly from APL, because APL had moved from Oakland to Phoenix, essentially at that time, Scottsdale. And so they were letting off a lot of people in the Bay Area. A lot of those people were getting jobs at Matson, including Matson CEO, current Matt Cox, came over from APL. Okay. So that was kind of the flow. And the CEO at the time was that I had been trying to get the job in Hawaii. They said, we're going to eliminate your job. So I was applying for a job with the Pacific Maritime Association, which Matson is a member. And I told the association, don't tell my they went ahead and told them, of course, because they're an important member. And so so I basically was told, you have to take this job, right? So, and that was head of the research department for the Pacific Maritime Association, which are chief economist.
Okay.
And they're the entity that negotiates with the ILWU labor union, which represents 30,000 longshore workers up and down the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And so my position was determining, like, when they are going to hire more people for each port, like approvals from the industry side, how many people we want, and then negotiating the rates, what's this going to impact, the assessments for covering the pension plans and the health benefits, all that. Because the way it works on the West Coast is the labor union goes to a hiring hall. The workers every day go to a hiring hall and the employers the night before put in their requests for labor. So they are not permanent employees of any individual employer. And so it's a system that needs to be regulated by both sides, basically.
There's like a stable of people who are available at any time.
Right.
And
it's different jobs, different
right.
skill sets. Right. So crane operators and things. And there's all kinds, from an economist standpoint, there are some interesting problems, right? Like every crane operator gets paid the same amount,
mm-hmm.
but everyone knows certain crane operators are better than others.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of issues with companies trying to pay under the table or whatever to get.
I want Joe.
They want, we want this guy, and then we want Joe to, so it's just all kinds of interesting, because their competitor, all these shipping company, it's mostly stevedoring companies, but in many cases the shipping lines own their own terminals as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of these things that have to be jockeyed around. But in general, the job was that going into negotiations can be very stressful. I didn't like the individuals I was working with. So I was looking for other things to do. And the former CEO of Matson, Brad Mulholland, had been pushed out at Matson as part of all of these changes.
And you're your friend too, your mentor, right?
He was. This was a different.
Oh,
he was the senior person was pushed out.
I see.
And he was looking to start up a new shipping line to Hawaii. And so I started working with him on that project. And, and and some other things as well, but kind of looking to be more entrepreneurial at that point, or doing kind of new ventures. And that's really, part of my story as I look back on it is, what I really get excited about is like trying to bring competition or bring lower rates or greater efficiency or new services. Those are like the things that, as an economist, as like somebody who loves the region, I want more competition, right? So, there's so there are a number of new kind of ventures that I started into after that. So one of the ones, we brought Waterman Steamship to Guam.
Okay.
And they were a roll-on, roll-off carrier, U.S. flag, receiving MSP. And so we put together a team with former Matson employees who I'd worked with before, Tom Ahillen, who was the general manager here in Guam for APL, and then Matson, when Matson bought the service, and then Alfred Leon Guerrero, who worked with Tom, both in operations for APL and for Matson as well. So we put together a sales team, and we're doing Ro-Ro. I went down from the Bay Area down and met with Joe Ryan, who'd come out from New York, down at Port Hueneme, because in Ventura County is where the ship would leave.
Okay.
And we put that service together. And then when Horizon Lines left Guam, Matson had a monopoly for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sending a letter to, emails and so forth to APL saying, you need to get back in the Guam in Guam. And after, 5 years of trying, APL eventually said, this looks interesting. Let's do a study. And so Tom Ahillen and I teamed up to do that study.
Okay.
And convinced APL that made too much sense. They were operating U.S. flag to Japan and Korea from the West Coast. So, there are a number of options, and we ended up putting in a feeder service from Japan and Korea down to Guam and Saipan, and then back to Korea. And for initiation of the service, they really wanted Tom, because he had been here, well known.
He'd already done it.
He'd done it. Everybody, all the businesses know him and love him. But Tom was like, "No, I'm retired.
Mm-hmm.
I want to spend time with the grandkids." So initially, they were saying, "Well, we want to get somebody who has APL experience and knows our systems." And I said, "Yeah, I understand." But at the time, nobody at APL had any familiarity with Guam. Nobody wanted to move to Guam.
Right.
So I told my now wife at the time, I said, I think they're going to come back and offer it to me, and I have to take it.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. So that was 10 years ago. So 2015, we brought APL back to Guam.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the GM for the first 2 years. And I think if you look at the rates, the rates to Guam used to be $2,000 higher than Hawaii, or Matson's rates, not even talking about APL's rates. And the rates now are about $2,000 less than Hawaii.
Right.
So it's been about a $4,000 per container difference just on Matson's rates for 10 years.
Just because there's competition.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it, in the course of that explanation or the answer to my question, I heard all these acronyms: RORO,
Right.
roll on, roll off, right? Which I assume RORO was kind of like
Roll on, roll
right?
off. Yes.
And then MSP, and then feeder.
Right.
Can you talk to me about the structure of the shipping and logistics industry? Because like SIVA, like all these Pack Air, I hear all these names.
Right.
How does that work in infrastructure? Can you lay the landscape? Because it's so complicated, so regulated, and I have no idea.
It is. And that's one of the things about being in the industry is you learn something new every day.
Yeah.
There's more to learn. There's more, and still on like the documentation side, it's still like crazy to me. And, it's like, but I always try to rely on subject matter experts and build teams,
right,
people who know this stuff. But the base, is that there's carriers. There's U.S. and there's each of the carriers fly under a certain flag. And then there's and they're carrying mostly containers, containerized. The roll-on, roll-off are mostly for automobiles. So it's basically like a big floating garage with a ramp. You drive in and drive off. The lower decks can be raised usually so that for higher deck, so you could bring in rolling equipment, fire trucks or cranes or things like that can be brought in. Then there are freight forwarders and NVOCCs. And an NVOCC means non-vessel operating common carrier. And a common carrier is basically somebody who can offer service to third parties. That's their common carrier. They have a tariff. Anybody who shows up can ship with the shipping line. Non-vessel operating common carrier buys space on carriers and resells it.
Okay.
The biggest component of that is less than container load shippers.
Mm-hmm.
So for the most part, the carriers are outside of the less than container load in business. It's too much labor. Unions get involved. They don't want to be involved in that. So there's a number of people in Guam that provide less than container load service, mostly LA to Guam. So that's, there, you can go down the list. There's CTSI, there's Guam Freight Service, there's Triple B, there's DGX, there's Dependable Guam Express, who's DHX in Hawaii. But there's a whole host of...
What do you think the average revenue per those like freight forwarders is?
So generally, the revenue they're charging is around, at this point, $650 cubic foot.
Okay.
But there's a lot of other charges. And that's the industry, the freight forwarding industry, worldwide. You end up, there's certain practices that I'm hoping to try to change for my own business for Guam, is that people are often quoted something and then get a bill that has a lot more charges that they weren't expecting.
Right.
And it's just kind of the way, and everybody does it. It's not, there are some that are maybe a little more egregious than others, but it's kind of just the way that it's done. And again, I think, before we started, we were talking about kind of that feeling that customers have when using a service, and you come away, like if somebody tells you, Ryan, it's going to cost you $60. You're like, oh, okay, that's cool. $60. I'll plan for it. You spend it. But if somebody tells you, oh, Ryan, it's cost you $50, you're like, oh, $50. Okay, fine. And then you get a bill for 60. You're like,
yeah,
you just feel like you're getting ripped off.
Sure.
Right. And nobody likes,
is this even real?
It's like, you're like, what is this charge?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the whatever. And it's just, I just, think that the people, and I hear these stories all the time of people who are just get very upset about these things because you feel like they're taking advantage of you. They now have your freight that you paid for now sitting in their office, and they won't give it to you until you paid an extra $10 or whatever, or $100, or sometimes it's a lot more. Some of the ocean shipping practices for international shipments, the practice forever has been another term is there's the shipper and the consignee. And the shipper is not the carrier. So that's a kind of a misnomer in the industry. The shipper is the person who's sending the shipment.
Okay.
The port charges that the carriers pay will be denominated in the origin country's currency.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're shipping from Korea, it'll be Korean won. There's a certain charges that are Korean won.
Right.
There's certain charges in Guam that are dollars. Then you decide whether you're going to send it, prepaid or collect. Depends on whether the shipper pays the carrier or whether the consignee pays the carrier.
Right.
But in general, even if for most carriers, the consignee will always pay the local charges, even if the shipping is paid by the origin, or vice versa. The shipper will end up paying the origin charges, even though the person in Guam is paying for the ocean freight.
Mm-hmm.
And so that now Matson is, because they're domestic from the West Coast, they're all-in rates.
All inclusive.
It's all inclusive.
Okay.
It's just dollars, right? When we put in APL for the foreign rates, I wanted it to be all-in rates.
Mm-hmm.
But there's kind of a mismatch with the other carriers who are doing kind of the international standard, which is the person doesn't always know the full cost. They think, I'm going to go with this other carrier because the rate, the rate I'm being quoted is lower.
Mm-hmm.
But then it gets to Guam and they've got to pay another $600
all these hidden
to get it released. Yeah. And it can be big, like the entire Guam port charges for offloading get added to your rate that they weren't expecting.
Right.
So, and those are the types of things that my business, I'm trying to kind of clean up to make it more user-friendly for people, more transparent, and reduce the costs of shipping into the region in other ways.
That makes a lot of sense because the margins are so small in everything that we do, right? Unless we're doing it at scale, and we're not doing a lot of stuff at scale here, right? We just don't have the option for it. So we have to be precise, and the difference between 1 or 2% is lifeblood and development costs and expansion and marketing and payroll and all that stuff.
Exactly.
So you bring APL now. So APL, right? And so the landscape is you have carriers who are the aggregators, right? And then you have the freight forwarders who fill up all the gaps.
Or the freight forwarders are kind of the aggregators in order to supply full containers to the carriers.
Well, the carriers are the aggregators, and they have all the space.
Right.
And then it's at the bottom end of this is the freight forwarders who make sure all the space is filled, right?
Within their container. They're only looking at their
segments,
their bottom line, right?
But then you have the common carriers, and the aggregator, this whole infrastructure that exists.
There's a whole infrastructure, and the challenge. There's challenges. I mean, as an individual, like as you talk about Guam and scale, one of the challenges is if you want to start a new business and you want to bring something into Guam to sell, if you were to get a full container, that's like 18 tons of product that you've now got to store in a warehouse, sell, and you've got to put out a lot of money. So there's a natural tendency for small businesses in Guam to use the freight forwarding industry because they want to ship less than container load, or air freight is another option.
Well, real estate is so expensive, fuel is so expensive here, so just to keep and maintain anything. And then you have the weather, so you need a hardened structure. So
and a lot of the warehousing is right now being built up for construction companies looking on military construction, and they obviously can spend a lot more than smaller businesses who are looking to warehouse items. So
okay, so I think we've established you as a subject matter expert to the point where I think I'd like to talk about the Jones Act.
Yes.
How it affects pricing and everything here. So I've heard Jones Act doesn't matter. I've heard Jones Act does matter. Tell me how the Jones Act works and affects the people of Guam.
Yeah. So Guam is technically has an exemption to the Jones Act in that pure Jones Act requires U.S. built vessels, U.S. flagged with U.S. crew, and 75% U.S. ownership.
Okay.
It's full Jones Act. So Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico are full Jones Act, coastwise laws of the United States.
Dude, when you say they're full Jones Act, meaning they're under the Jones Act and they're subject to Jones Act carriers?
There's 100% of the carriage from between only domestic carriage, so it's from the United points in the United States to these locations. So from, if it was Alaska to Hawaii, Alaska to Seattle, Hawaii to Los Angeles to Hawaii, 100% the ships have been built in the United States, must be owned by U.S. citizens, must have U.S. crews.
Okay.
100%. Guam has an exemption in that Guam can use statute vessels. They can be U.S. flag vessels, which do not have been built in the United States and currently do not have to be controlled by U.S. citizens.
Okay.
So APL right now is owned by CMA CGM, which is a French company, and the vessels are not made in the United States. Now, one of the acronyms I used earlier was MSP.
Yes.
And that's the Maritime Subsidy Program or Military Subsidy Program, I forget which, but it's run by the Maritime Administration of the U.S. Department of Transportation. There's a certain number of slots. And Guam there's always been various forms of subsidy, operating differential subsidy used to be before. So when APL used to come, and so there's always been carriers that, like Sealand, would go to Hawaii and then to Guam. And if you go to Hawaii, you cannot have subsidy. And basically Matson got that law put in place a long time ago. So always going to Guam, there'd be a Hawaii company and there'd be a subsidized company.
Okay.
And and basically Hawaii being at least 10 times bigger than Guam, it makes sense if you're going to go trans-Pacific, go to Hawaii and you go on to Guam, there's a lot of value in having that Hawaii freight.
Sure.
It's just, that direction.
Going anyway.
Your ship.
Yeah.
And then if you continue on to Guam and then go on to China, which is what Matson does, Guam is nice to have, but that Hawaii freight is what pays for the Jones Act vessels.
Okay.
So Guam is not subject to full Jones Act, but the economics favor the full Jones Act because you can include Hawaii on the westbound voyage.
Okay.
And so right now, in response to APL coming in, I'll allege that a Hawaii senator at Matson's behest put in a law that limited the number of MSP slots that can go to Guam.
Oh, interesting.
To the 2 that APL has.
Oh, okay.
So kind of grandfathered in APL's service.
Right.
But cannot increase and could not have 5 ships that would come up the West Coast.
Right.
And so that's so there's the Jones Act does not, and the Jones Act only impacts West Coast or U.S. mainland to Guam.
Okay.
And so one of the things that, and the full Jones Act only impacts the fact that Hawaii is a necessary, or not necessary, it's highly advantageous to have Hawaii freight as you're going from the West Coast to Guam.
Okay.
The MSP, the issue is just that, I think it's about $6 million per vessel right now, and that represents the differential between operating a non-U.S. flag vessel and a U.S. flag vessel.
6 million.
So you could operate a service to Guam U.S. flag, but your costs are gonna be $6 million more than APL's, and that's per vessel.
Right.
APL has 2 vessels, that's $12 million, right? So there is some subsidy, and that's part of what is affecting Guam. Part of my business, One Micronesia World Logistics, is based on the fact that, having brought APL in, competition is good, brought down the rate some. But in thinking about it, one of the questions that I was asking, you kind of go back and ask these fundamental questions, and you say, look around this room, what was made in the U.S.? Right now, we buy 75% of everything in the region comes from the West Coast. And the question is why?
Yeah.
And so we're only hurting ourselves with the Jones Act to the extent that we're buying from stuff from the West Coast that we could buy in Asia, for instance, or Europe or elsewhere. Guam is outside of U.S. customs, so we don't pay tariffs here.
Okay.
Unless you're buying something from China out of the West Coast, goes from China to L.A., pays the tariffs, which everyone is now much more aware of because of Trump's tariffs, but there were tariffs before. And so those tariffs then get embedded into the cost of the item by the wholesaler in the West Coast. And so when we buy them, we now are paying the tariffs.
Okay, so let's talk about produce, food.
Food.
Right? Why are we buying everything from Asia?
So produce, and I just came back from Korea with a friend who is bringing produce in on air freight for Guam on a limited basis, he's starting up some more business, has some business right now with Payless and is going to be increasing. But in general, because Guam is U.S., all food is subject to U.S. Department of Agriculture inspection.
Okay.
Right. So to the extent that they need to have USDA inspectors in Korea or the Philippines or wherever we might want to buy produce, that's what's needed. And so USDA inspectors in the Philippines are there only for pineapple.
I see.
So if we want, we can eat all the pineapple we want, but that's not a staple item, right? For consumption, right?
So if I hired 15 USDA inspectors and I had them camp out in Japan, then I can then ship stuff.
Right.
From
right.
Japan.
Or another thing that, we can look at as, through law is, Japan's safety standards with regard to agriculture are higher than the U.S.
Yes,
right?
Please come.
So the ostensibly everything that's produced in Japan should be good should have USDA should just immediately say okay. And similar, Korea has very high standards as well. There are issues with getting those approvals with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that's kind of what one of my business partners who's bringing in the produce. That's what his expertise is.
I see.
It's working with those items. They have some issues for a while, like mangoes they were bringing in, but because Guam, and the same with Hawaii, because we grow mangoes, there's a lot more concern about pests that could come in with mangoes. But, there's certainly a lot more opportunity, and it's growing. And I think, Payless has become aware that, some of their competitors, Happy Mart, et cetera, have been growing because they have more they've been
they're cultivating that network.
And the network is not just being targeted. So some of it was that the initially product was being more targeted for the Korean community in Guam. And I think that's now been expanding, that people are buying and finding fresh greens.
Well, no one's scared of the Korean market anymore. Everyone loves it. You cultivate before, it's just like, oh, where is this place? It's foreign, and now it's like, this is part of my life.
Exactly. So there's some aspects that
Sure.
take time culturally.
No, it's
Kind of adopt new practices, and so those are some of the barriers, right? And getting people to try new products, like for like one was like cost beer, like you go into cost you less, and it's like a fraction of the price, and it's fresh, it's pretty good, right? But people aren't familiar with the brand. It's a Korean brand, right? They're like it's just there's things like that there's some kind of certain markets just that are impediments to a new adoption of what could be a lower priced item. People aren't familiar with it, right?
It's like Chinese food. You start with sweet and sour as pork, and then you're eating like ethnic food from Outer Mongolia, right? So it's like the progression
over time. Evolves, right? And so that's what we're kind of in the midst of, I think, in Guam right now is and that's really offers a tremendous transformation of our costs. But it's living.
It's a way of thinking about the problem differently,
right? Just kind of flip the whole thing. Like, why are we buying from the mainland? And the reasons we buy from the mainland are historical. Guam used to be a navy controlled by the Navy. The port of Guam was a Navy port. Only U.S. flag vessels could even enter Guam. Right. The reason why all the other islands buy everything from Guam is because the U.S. government ships went out from Guam. So if you're a business owner in Majuro or Pohnpei, you bought from the West Coast because there was only one highway. Right. And so that's kind of how the whole region developed as, and it's U.S. dollar, it's English, it's easy. It's easy to buy from the West Coast relative to people trying to buy from China or Korea. Shipping is part of it. Buying's another part of it. There's certain impediments. And that's kind of what my business, I'm trying to kind of break down some of these barriers to make it easier for people to source items from other locations.
That's really interesting because, like, for me, my mind's kind of blown to a degree, thinking that the consumer apparatus that I've grown up in is perpetuating kind of our reliance. And you say this thing about prices, but this whole time there's this whole other, and you go to the Philippines too, and you see all these brands that you've never heard of, right? But these are European mainstream brands. But it's just my insular experience. I've never seen them, right? Or even like Donkey can seem, or Daiso can seem like a foreign experience. But then these are it's a multinational organization.
Right.
A lot of countries in Hawaii, but it's just I've never been in to the point where the Asian supermarket, right?
Right.
But once an oddity now celebrated as an experience, right? They're having like night parties.
Exactly.
Data Points is powered by GTA Business because reliable data starts with the reliable network. If your current provider is slowing you down, it's time to make the switch. GTA Business delivers faster speeds, better reliability, and local support you can count on. And as Guam's only full-stack provider, from small business, enterprise, and government, GTA offers fiber, wireless, and secure data center solutions to keep your business running without compromise. Bring your business to GTA and start getting more from your network today.
One of the advantages for Guam is the rates from anywhere in the world to Asia are super low because containers are all being sent out from Asia and need to be returned.
Right.
Right. And so it's called the backhaul.
Okay.
In transportation.
Yeah.
And so one of my customers, Lorea Industries, Murray Floor, she brings in wine from Spain and Chile.
Okay.
And she had a 20-foot container of wine she wanted to bring in from Chile. And her forwarder, H. Hildebrand, a big international wine distributor or wine logistics and alcohol logistics company out of South Africa, they quoted her like $9,000 Chile to Guam. And I said, and she says, I just want to pay the $6,000 that I paid last time, right? And I was like, okay, I think we can help you. So I'm a member of FIATA, which is an international freight forwarding organization based in Switzerland, in Geneva. And one of the issues that I had in starting the service was you need to have a $175,000 or $150,000 bond, depending on which service you want to offer, with the Federal Maritime Commission in order to get the NVOCC license. And to get bonds in Guam turns out to be really difficult.
Yes.
The bond, if you go online, and there's all these people that offer freight forwarders in the U.S. bonds, but it's about $1,000 for a $75,000 bond, $1,000 a year. They wouldn't offer to Guam.
Wow.
Partly because of I think Guam has certain laws around insurance and bonding that prevent that. But then when you go to the foreign bonding, people who sell bonds for foreign companies, they wouldn't, because we're in the U.S.
Right.
So we're in kind of this betwixt catch-22. People in Guam who sell bonds wanted to sell me a bond for $10,000 a year and put a cap the collateral.
Right. They want to collateral on your house.
Collateral in my house. And my wife is like, no, you're not doing your business venture with my house at risk. Right? So but through FIATA, I was able to get into their group bond.
Right. Oh, okay, cool.
So it's like a $300 a year that I pay to be part of their whole group bond. So it's like I have this great deal with them. I also have this network. So I sent emails to the FIATA members in San Antonio, Chile. We'll do this. Found somebody who'll do it for like $1,000, bring in all the freight and ship it. Do you know how much a 20-foot container from Chile to Korea is?
How much?
$400.
Whoa. Because it's coming, right? Yeah. God.
The 40-foot container from like West Coast to Korea is like $800 max, maybe $500 now.
Right.
So it's always, and same from Europe. Europe has some problems. We just from Spain, but with the war and closures of Suez.
So we just change our distribution channels. That would make a significant difference.
It would make a significant difference. And so that's one of the things that I'm really interested in is things like just like one of my little pet ones that I shared with Mike Benito at Payless and Kathy Calvo is like, I want like European cheeses because, European cheeses in Europe are just cheese.
Right.
Like if you're like a kid backpacking in Europe, like you get bread and cheese is like the cheap thing to eat.
It's cheese.
It's just cheese, and it's fantastic, right? In the U.S., we consider it to be really high-end luxury items because the tariffs are the tariff is over 100% on cheese from Europe. And if you think about if you buy a European cheese in Guam, more than likely the way it got here is it went across the Atlantic to New York, paid these huge duties, went on a train to L.A., went to, say, Unified Grocers or one of the wholesalers that sell into the retailers here in Guam, like Payless. And so it comes with, there's embedded a lot of cost.
Right.
Where we can bring it, it's good for export. USDA, accepts it.
Mm-hmm.
We can bring it to Guam duty-free if we bring it direct from Europe.
There's
all these opportunities, right?
Those opportunities.
There's huge opportunities.
And they just keep charging the same price.
Well, no,
just no. But that's what will happen.
But one of the things that what I would like to see is not just price, but more variety, right? That's what we have the opportunities for Guam to be a much more eclectic offerings in our for purchasing.
Yeah, I've also thought like the aggregation idea, right? Just like those meal clubs are all doing it,
right?
And there's all these hard to find SKUs. Like, you go into a store, you never know what you're going to get because the product mix changes all the time. There's lack of consistency.
Right.
But if you got together with the group and had like an ordering club and you just aggregated, right? Like, hey, we all like these things. And that's what happens. I think that's how all the wine people get into business.
Right.
They all start buying all the wines they like. And they're just like, hey, let's sell it to keep the habit.
Exactly. And so that's part of what we're looking at for, some of the with my partner in Korea. He has a unit at a sales unit at Garak Market in Seoul, which is the wholesale,
the Tsukiji
for produce and for seafood, and auction market. And and I have cousins who are from Salinas, California, who are in the produce business and are like produce brokers.
Mm-hmm.
And right now there's a lot of the farms, the big American financed farms in Mexico, are having a lot of issues because of the tariffs bringing items up in. And so I'm like, all that stuff we could buy.
Yeah.
And we can ship direct from Mexico. Transit times is an issue it's a little bit. So, one of the things about Matson is they have a 2-week transit time from the West Coast. And so as the GM at APL, that was an issue because our transit time is 3 weeks, right? And if you're bringing in produce, the differential in the price for the container is outweighed by your loss in spoilage if you're shipping fresh. So, as the GM, I would tell people, like, don't even ship with Matson for fresh. They're better. That's, if it's frozen, we can talk, right? But, Matson provides a very good service. They're high costs, and part of that is they have high costs because they're a Jones Act operator.
Right.
And so there's other reasons, but that when it comes to fresh items from the West Coast, or I don't think we would be able to get fresh from Mexico necessarily, but what I am looking at would be air freight from Mexico to Korea and then bringing it down.
I see.
And in the same way that container rates going back to Asia are cheap, the same is true of air freight.
Yeah.
So that might be something we'll do. But one of the things we're also looking at is because we could bring a full container in, he could sell Mexican produce in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could bring a portion of it down to Guam.
Right, yeah.
So that's kind of the things.
The pipeline.
Right? So we're looking at these things.
So John, one of the things I heard before is like, the junk cars, right? The junk cars before were being sent to somewhere, right? And you would think there'd be a business for recycling to get like all this stuff off of Guam, but why isn't there?
So part of it is, the rates that the shipping lines charge. We have same way that the backhaul in the Trans-Pacific is very low because the containers are going empty.
Mm-hmm.
If we had more competition of carriers coming into Guam, I think we would have low backhaul rates out of Guam.
I see.
And all our recycling could go out. China's not accepting accepting recycling, and that was a big shift that happened. But part of it is trying to get the carriers to understand this is a revenue issue, and then also some of the carriers that come into Guam, they don't go directly back to Asia. They go on to Micronesia. So the junk cars would have to make a longer trip. They're junk cars. There's no hurry, right? But trying to, basically it's trying to convince the carriers that they need to charge a very low rate in order to make this happen. It's a bit of a challenge. There is some recyclables going. I don't know what the current rates they're getting. I'm a little bit distant from the business, but in trying to get that as kind of a something that they should do for the good of island.
Right.
That's an issue. There are programs that Gov Guam has tried to put in place for recycling, qualifying certificates, things like that, that would get reduced lift costs at the port of Guam, but it's not really translating to the carrier.
Right.
Like carriers getting that reduced lift. It's more applicable to somebody who might be bringing in a barge or a break bulk vessel that could load back recyclable material. But so I think it's a big opportunity, I think, for intervention in the market to incentivize the carriers to offer that service.
Okay.
And it's no, but it's in the radar, in my radar. But yeah,
but my mind is blown because again, it's a mindset thing, right?
Yeah.
You hear about like the impact of this thing. So like let's talk about.
So the junk cars is a good one. We'll stay on that one.
Okay.
Because I think, there's a recycling fee on the cars, which is good. But I think what's happening is like the people who are the car recyclers right now, they're accepting the fee, and then they're storing the cars on Guam.
Okay.
I don't know that you see big lots of junked, smashed cars
from the satellite too.
Right.
Yeah, you can't.
And so the question is like, is the money being paid without requiring the removal of the cars from Guam?
Right.
Right? Is there some step that needs to be added to the process? Because, if storing it forever, I'm going to make more money than paying the cost of shipping it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to happen. I was involved in selling the scrap from the crane demolition at the port of Guam.
Okay.
And, what we were getting from the scrap dealer was covering, was some margin above, and this is pretty high grade metal. We're making margin over what it costs to ship it. But with a car, there's a lot more work involved in recycling it. And so the amount of money that the recyclers get might not justify shipping it.
Right. You got to stand up a loss leader to kind of like break it apart and do all those things, right? And
Yeah.
You have to build an industry around it.
So there's some need, there's a definite need for government intervention into that market to make that happen.
And but one of the things the direction I was going was more so like there's all these opportunities, but what you said broke a mindset that I had that, everything that all the shipping is just because of this Jones Act thing. But really it's like, it's the consumer choices that I'm making in a lot of ways. But how does that...
And the businesses, it's the same because like businesses have long-term contracts, where they're representing certain brands.
Right.
There's certain, and that's just...
And this is just structured.
It's structurally, there's a structural impediments to it.
But what about construction materials and commodities though? Because how does that correlate to housing?
So construction materials, if it's federally funded, then there's some Buy America Act and the Build America Act. But if it's not federally funded, we can be bringing construction materials in from China and Korea all day long.
Okay.
And so, and there is some of that happening.
So where does our cement come from?
Cement is coming in on cement ships and is being offloaded at like Cementon. And I think it's Singapore. I'm not sure the source.
Okay.
I think there was recently, similarly, there was a discussion about eliminating the Jones Act because of the high price of oil. Mm-hmm. It's like we don't get gasoline from the U.S. mainland.
Yeah, we get it.
We get it locally in Asia.
Sure.
So the Jones Act doesn't really impact us at all.
Okay.
For oil prices. What does impact us is we just have limited competition.
Yeah.
Right? And because we're a small island.
Right.
And, whether we could get, and I think gas prices are just going up everywhere. But the fact that when you have limited competition, the tendency towards duopoly pricing is profound.
And that's interesting to me too, because we're getting to a place where where traditional retail, traditional business models are failing.
Right.
And then you have these paper-heavy businesses, who haven't really modernized, and so and you have these like SSBCI, that's Destino Guahan, right? So you have this venture capital program that's willing to invest millions into startups, but capitalization, right? You have a lot of great ideas, but it's not just the capitalization and its expertise, but also the data and leveraging the data,
right,
and breaking the mindset. There's so much to really unpack there. So considering the evolution of where things are going with the economy, things are kind of failing there, but there's opportunity out there, and so there's this whole new wave of entrepreneurs who if you're willing to put in the sweat equity and exploit the opportunity, you can operate in a disruptive way so leanly. Like the giant operator like Matson or APL even, those guys have these big cost infrastructure.
Yeah.
You can be the Larry Hillblum of the world, right? Just find that little opportunity and cowboy it through.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of opportunity in Guam. And I mean, it's one of the kind of the paradoxes or the benefits and problems is that we're so small that, a lot of the big industries that are disruptive they don't look at Guam.
Right.
So, there's no Uber, right? Yeah. So you can do your own.
Stroll, right?
We didn't Stroll, right? There's no Starbucks, so you can do Infusion. You can start your own, like whatever is working. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
No.
You can just look at the model that's working somewhere else and do a Guam version, and you're not going to become a billionaire.
No.
But you can have a really nice.
There's a segment.
Yes. to hit. And, I think the kind of the shift to Korean tourism has been interesting. Right now there's, impediments to that, but the one of the benefits is that Korean tourists like to rent cars and go out and check their phones and what are the cool places to go in Guam? What are the cool? So if you start a cool restaurant, tourists are gonna want to go there, and so I think that expands the opportunities for entrepreneurs in Guam, for young people to start things that are cool. That a what would a young person from Korea who's 25 years old, what would they want to do?
Right.
Probably a 25-year-old in Guam has a much better idea of what that might be and help make that experience happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think there's this opportunity. The Japanese tourism, for various reasons in the past, was very tour focused. It was kind of a very curated experience because the Korean tourists drive on the same side of the road. I mean, Koreans drive on the same side of the road. There's they're more comfortable just getting in a car and doing things. And just kind of the changes in the way everybody orders things online, that's just happening, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities along that route. And similarly for bringing in products for Guam, what I'm trying to do is make it easy for people to, if you identify a product that you want to bring in from China, you identify a product that you want to bring in from Korea, Europe, New Zealand, wherever, I can help you make that process of buying it and shipping it to Guam easier and less expensive.
So how much does the Chamber of Commerce does the Chamber of Commerce look at this as a way to develop economic opportunity, like in terms of like developing these opportunities in Korea and Japan? Do you think that's happening enough?
So, the Chamber of Commerce and I attend meetings, and I have not yet made this presentation to them, which is essentially similar to what we're discussing. I have a couple ideas around that, but in general, there are members of the Chamber of Commerce that I've been meeting with individually.
Right.
But the Chamber, in a big sense, is kind of the entrenched business interests have kind of their ideas of the way they want to bring their current business model is they bring in this brand, they represent this brand. And similarly, Matson and APL are members of the chamber. And have a lot of sway. There's, it's just the chamber is kind of an entrenched business model interest that some of this I would like to present, and I will present to them soon. But in one of the models that I'm actually thinking of pivoting towards is for a freight association.
So great. And so because the reason I've been nodding my head emphatically, I'm waiting to explode, because I think we're on the same page.
Right.
And I think that is the value of the trade association, to cultivate those relationships, because even experientially, right? I just went on a trip to Japan through my Rotary Club.
Right.
And I interacted with our sister club out of Shiroi. And so there's all this industry there. They're building this giant data center. There's all there's all these businesses forming up, and real estate's burgeoning. But they're coming here and we're going there, and just understanding the opportunities like you do requires being present and developing and forging those relationships. And that's the value that I think Chamber could bring to any member, right? Not just the big business, but the small guy, to come on these trade missions to wherever and establish these opportunities where along the lines of these places where we think Guam's economy has to go.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked if you spoke to Chamber, because hey, let's start this right away. Because look at because there's not a lot of opportunities for the average person to go, especially as someone who wants to do a startup or something. They may have limited economic opportunity to do that, to establish relationships. But if there's an organization who can facilitate that for you, that can be really instrumental. Just even to open your eyes to the possibility.
Yeah. No, I think the organization, so my thought is to create kind of a parallel organization, which would be like the Guam Freight Association or the Micronesian Freight Association, that would buy freight services collectively.
Okay.
And have it bid in.
Like a co-op. Okay.
Yeah. And then with it would be rebates at the end of the year. And I think the legislation was introduced recently in Guam for limited cooperative associations.
Okay.
So they could even have capital investors as long as it's controlled by the members. So I think that might be an interesting model.
That is.
To put in place. And then basically that would be the vehicle. So, the main thing that you could provide would be like for less than container load business. Right now it's very fragmented out of everywhere except, it's fragmented out of LA, but it's only really developed with competition out of LA. Everywhere else, there's not a good offering. And so people are kind of at the mercy of whoever you're dealing with. And the rates can be, my friend, his wife, my business partner, his wife is from Busan and just brought in 3 pallets, 7 cubic meters of her own household goods stuff. And through the various machinations, it ended up costing $2,800.
Okay.
And for 7 cubic meters, that's well over the cost of shipping the same thing from LA.
Right.
And we're in the shipping industry. Like this is like our industry.
I know this stuff.
We know this stuff, and we know how ridiculous this cost is, right? But it was just kind of one of those things that kind of we like lesson learned, but it's more, for us, it's more like seeing the opportunity, because, the rates obviously from Japan or Korea or China are much, much lower. And so, right now there is a trade mission that the governor and GVB had a trade mission to Taiwan, and, Kaohsiung, one of the carriers, has a direct service, Kaohsiung to Guam. It's a few days. So that could be another avenue that could open up for Guam. So, we have, 3 good markets really close in Korea, Japan, and Taiwan to supply goods to Guam. And we shouldn't, cost of living, cost of goods, we have no tariffs, there's use tax, there's things, but overall, the cost of stuff should not be that much higher than in Korea, Taiwan, or Japan.
Right. And what we're looking at is we're 30% over like everything that you can buy in the mainland, right? 30 to 40% if you're buying a consumer.
Right.
Versus if it's coming from an Asian, but the differentiation is you keep as much of the margin as you can, right? But if there's competition from the Asian markets, you would get the best price. So one thing that you said is data, and certain insights that can be gleaned from the data that we're already collecting, or if
we had better data collection.
With place. Tell me about what you think those things are.
So that was interesting because 30 something years ago when I was working for PM&O, and they were running that little carrier that went through Micronesia and went to Mindanao. The owner of the company
is this Pearl, right? You're talking about?
I'm sorry?
Pearl, PM&O.
PM&O. They Philippines Micronesian Orient shipping line.
All right.
And they were looking at coming into the Asia to Guam market, specifically Hong Kong to Guam, on their way back to the West Coast. And so they asked me to get the data from GovGuam on what comes into Guam from Asia. It's not. It's the only thing that's there is the dollar value of items per country, but not quantities, not containers. There's no breakdown. It's not available. And so he ended up not entering the market because of that unknown, right? So I think there's been some talk within the agencies of Guam trying to make that trade data more transparent, right, and available, so then people can see what the opportunities may be, right?
That would be true.
And that's, so that's exactly. And so one of the ideas, in looking at the Freight Association, one of the other issues is that there's that transparency, there's the ability to negotiate rates, have simplified, easy to use rates, so you don't get these bills that, that are a surprise. The other one is advocacy. And so if you go back 30-something years when we had the Guam rate cases, Guam actually won that case. At the Federal Maritime Commission, the administrative law judge ruled that the rates to Guam were double the rates they should have been at that time, which was a fraction of what they are now. But they were double the rate they should be. But what they ruled is that GovGuam does not have standing for the class of shippers.
Oh, okay.
So GovGuam only got damages for any bill of lading that had GovGuam as a shipper or consignee on it, which is essentially nothing.
Nothing. Because it's all outsourced.
It's all bought from vendors in Guam.
Wow.
So Guam won the case and got nothing. And so the current state of deregulation at the Surface Transportation Board in particular, but at the FMC as well, is rates can go up every year 7.5% plus producer price index, and they're presumed reasonable. But if they ever go up, so you can only challenge if they go up more than that. But it's per shipper. It's per individual or consignee. It's individual customer has to file a complaint, and then they'll investigate that rate complaint. And so, and then they've had fuel surcharges have been just considered a pass-through. And no one has really investigated the fuel surcharges, right? It was, I think 2 years ago, Matson dropped their fuel charge in half. There was no change in the gas prices per se, but they just dropped the fuel charge in half.
Okay.
At the same time, they raised their ocean freight rates. That in the way they do their fuel surcharges, a percentage of the ocean freight. So they changed the two so that the net result was no change in the rate.
I see.
Now that's a perfect question for someone to challenge at the at the Surface Transportation Board in this case, because it's domestic. Wait a minute. If this fuel surcharge is correct, was it correct last month?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you're raising your ocean freight rates by X amount. That could be challenged, right?
Right.
But nobody is going to go to Washington, D.C. and file a complaint, hire attorneys to fight for their little piece, right? And so that's one of the advantages. If people were shipping under the auspices of a collective organization, the organization could undertake these challenges,
Right.
have somebody on retainer in DC, and that would be an interesting, and then the individual company doesn't have like, oh, I don't want to ruin my relation. I get a good rate with Matson. I don't want to screw that up, right? And there's always that fear, that you're not going to.
Because it is a small, relatively.
Who's going to spend that? Like you're going to fly to Hawaii? I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's with Guam. So, basically we're kind of outside the, we're too far in order to even be able to utilize the limited means of challenging these things, the limited regulation that's in place. So it needs to be either competition or, and like I say, I'm not really challenging that issue. Like for me, it's more our sourcing and logistics that we need to fix. And that's really where the big opportunities are. So
it sounds like
it's like, Matson and APL, they do, they're a fine job for what they do. They offer different services. Matson's a higher level of service, better transit time. APL's rates are lower, and they've kind of settled into that kind of relationship where they've kind of settled into what is the right and differentiation.
And you're right, because some of these big operators would never want to come here because they consider it's like a lifestyle business or a scale business, right? You're not going to be scale, but you can get a good living out of it. And if you think about what you're getting paid by an employer versus what you can make on your own as an entrepreneur, if you have some of that capacity and knowledge and willing to put yourself out there, then you can make a living doing that, and a good living.
Yes, I think so too.
So if you were an entrepreneur and you, with your knowledge, well, you are an entrepreneur.
I am.
Yeah. But where do you think, if you were a 28-year-old person and you were like, okay, I'm going to leave Guam and go make my way in the world, or I'm going to stay here and figure it out, what do you think you would do?
I think that's an individual decision for each person. I think, for me personally, I would probably want to see some of the world and then come back, right? And I think that's where, starting something like a stroll, you have that, you can go out and you can do it through travel, right? And right now, we just flew to Seoul on Air Seoul. It was $135 round trip.
Mm-hmm.
And Seoul is just an amazing world capital of all kinds of things available, right? All kinds of, different cuisines, different restaurants. And of course, there's Korean culture, Korean cuisine, but in all kinds of, vendors, marketplaces, you can see all kinds of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So, people can go out and see what else is available. China these days is, amazing. My wife's nephew goes to China to buy tea. He has a tea house in Austin, Texas.
Oh, cool.
And so, and serves Chinese gong fa. I think is that right? Gong fa style, where you sit around a table and share and talk and drink tea together, right? It has this, and just goes to China and buys tea there, right? There's like a lot of things that are offered. Like, one of the ones I'm thinking of is like Kava bar, right? Kava all over, all over the U.S.
Kava experience.
There's no Kava, right?
Something, yeah.
Or tuba, right? Something that's a little more unique, right? And, we have regionally, we have Sakao. You go to,
right,
Ponape and this, but, the Kava bar is a little different, generally is different than a Sakao experience, but you could kind of blend the two, but it could be, Guam as more a entree into the Pacific Islands,
Yeah, almost like a multicultural center.
Multicultural, right?
Yeah, the Polynesian Multicultural Center. But
Right, but in this case, it's all represented.
For the gateway to the No, that's good, John.
And the same thing, I think with coffees, there's great coffee in the region. Indonesia, Java is synonymous with coffee, right? And there's a lot of opportunity to bring in coffees. And I think the other thing, like in going to a place like Korea, so like a lot of the duty-free shops have just shut down. It's not just in Guam, it's Honolulu, New York, DFS is shut down. And it's partly consumer tastes.
Right.
There's first of all, if you're wealthy in Korea, you can buy all that stuff in Korea.
Yeah.
Right. There's no need to go to Guam to buy it. But the question is kind of to like the research that you would do is to say, what is expensive in Korea for like average Koreans? Because we tend to get, that's our tourism right now, is because the airfares are low. We're not getting rich Koreans necessarily.
Well, apparently Tommy Hilfiger does rich.
Maybe, right? There might be, but there are certain brands that if you go to Korea and you shop and you say, oh, this is how much this costs, and you know that you can buy it cheaper somewhere else, right? Then there's an opportunity for people when they come to Guam to, that DFS now that's empty in Tumon. One of the things, it wasn't open at night. There's plenty to do in Guam during the day.
Yeah.
Right. So why wasn't that open at night so people could go shopping at night just as something to do? And then maybe make a spontaneous purchase, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's just some things that could be executed a little bit better. And if we start, looking at what are those opportunities, it's just like, it's kind of starts with, what is, we could ask people like, a person in Guam who wants to be an entrepreneur, go talk to some Korean tourists.
Yeah.
Ask them.
No, really. Just, and
like, if you came to Guam, what are some things you would want to be able to do? What are some things that you might want to buy?
And that throughout your story is the networking component.
Yes.
And talking to people and knowing people and being in the room and being down the street and being part of the trade association, because that's where you get that context and that knowledge that you can lever. And I think that's what you're missing a lot. Just it's cool on LinkedIn and Instagram, but the face-to-face and the being there is really important too. And I encourage like everyone to just get out there and have the conversations and be face-to-face and be present in the moment. From a policy standpoint, what would you like to see that you think would help locally to kind of help your industry or help things overall relative to shipping and logistics?
That's a good question. From U.S. policy or Guam?
What are even like the bonding component? Some of the structural obstacles that exist that prevent more competition, which effectively limits or affects pricing.
Yeah, on the bonding side, there are people operating in Guam today on the kind of my competitors who are not bonded, who are not basically operating legally.
So that's fine.
No,
I'm just joking.
Yeah. But it's just, and I'm not going to name names, but that's just kind of because there's no structured service being offered in many cases, right? People just share containers and sell or whatever. That just, there's I felt that I needed to follow all the regulations because I'm a known entity, having, been at Matson, started up APL. It's like people are aware, like, I went to an MSC, Micronesian TOSCOM, Association of Terminal Operators of Micronesia, meetings and presenting my ideas. I was audited by the FMC like within a week. So like somebody dropped a dime on me, right? It's just that, and so you have to have I feel like I have to have my ducks in order for that reason. But getting, but that's an impediment, but that's kind of the federal government, which we have very little ability to change. But some of the things I think we mentioned earlier, having Korean and Japanese produce be certified for consumption in Guam, at least, even if it's just a Guam exemption,
Right.
would be huge, right? Just have it like a blanket acceptance that we can bring in. There's some things on kind of the Jones Act side, like U.S. beef, U.S. products that are brought into Korea, that if we buy them here, if we ship them from Korea, that would be a violation of the Jones Act, technically, if challenged, depending. There's different interpretations.
Okay.
But, if it's essentially stopped in transit, I think it's not covered, but there are other people who might say it would, right? So, but if it's transformed in Korea, like if they make bulgogi,
Right.
then it's clearly okay. And it's U.S. beef, so it's been USDA.
Right. So you're still buying the product, which has been processed in Korea.
It's been processed in Korea.
Interesting.
So there's opportunities like that. Some of it is, I think, some of the packaging so one of the other ones is FDA food products have to have English language, ingredients, nutrients, all those things. And the market is more accepting of English language labeling. So some of the opportunities are, if you see a product, working with a manufacturer or somebody in Korea or China or wherever to put together a Guam specific labeling, packaging. So, and that's all can be done,
Right.
but there's a certain amount of scale. They say, well, we want a minimum of X 5,000 orders. And as an entrepreneur, you're like, I'd rather just start with one pallet and see if I could sell that, right? And so it's still those types of impediments that require capitalization.
Yeah.
Right. So that
There's
your
different
because your initial startup is it just costs money. You need working capital. There's money. You're going to be buying product. It's going to take a while before you sell it.
Well, it's a co-op idea too, right? If you aggregate demand in a way.
The co-op idea is what can be a way to mitigate some of those challenges.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's really great, John. So this, like, of all the conversations, this has been one where it's really shifted my mind, because like there's been a general awareness, but like I said, there's outside my arena, and all these preconceived notions that I have just been kind of like turned on their head. So I really appreciate your time and the context that you brought to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, Ryan. It's been fun.
I don't know if you saw my head explode 4 or 5 different times, but generally I deal with things that are in my lane, and I have a frame of reference, and I'm the one bringing the shift in mindset. And in this instance, something that I'd never questioned has completely shifted my mindset, but also the parallels across the board for everything that we've been thinking about. If this kind of blows your mind, imagine what else will blow your mind when you stop questioning things that we've always accepted as fact, and started seeing if there is maybe an opportunity, and looking closer at the data, or questioning, hey, what if I had a little bit more data? What are the things that I can see, and what are the opportunities that I can find? And that's what we do here on Data Points. We continue to look for data, and we continue to look for opportunities to explore issues that affect us here on Guam and affect the cost of attainable housing, affect the speed of business, and affect our ability to fully execute the plan that we have in place. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate all your questions, comments, and we appreciate you giving us a follow and like on Instagram, Facebook, checking us out in long form on YouTube, and picking us up and downloading us on Apple Music and Spotify. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.